Hi, this is Roberto Rock for CGTuts, and today we'll finish with this series talking a bit about custom 2D filters on the Blender game engine. You can download them from blenderartist.org. They're being written by a user called Martin Sage, and also we'll do a quick skydome for our scene and a couple more things. So let's get started. Alright, we'll start by editing the sky texture in the GIMP. First load up the texture, and since we're going to map it to a sphere, we need to change the texture so it will be easier to unwrap later. Again, I've downloaded this texture from cgtextures.com. You can go there and grab any sky you like. So let's edit it. Go to filters and select distorts and polar coordinates. This will make our sky a circle, and it will be really easy to map later to the sphere. Notice that there's more distortion in the texture when you go to the edges of it. Will make up for it later with the unwrap. And right now I'm changing the height to 1024 pixels, so we have one of the sides already, or of the right amount of pixels, and we're going to cut the extra pixels on each side with the cut tool. Hit Shift C to select it, and just make a square selection where you want to cut, where you want to make the cut. Make sure the width of the image will be 10,024 pixels too. You can see the value changes if you move the slider, and just hit enter to apply the cut. And that's about it. We only have to apply our gamma correction that we did to all the previous textures too. It's a good idea to make a preset like I did, because if you work with textures this way, you will need it a lot of times. And that's it. Hit OK, and we got our texture, our sky texture, ready to be mapped. Let's move to Blender. Alright, now in Blender we first need to add a sphere to have as our skydome, and to do so just hit space and go to add mesh UV sphere. I left the sphere as default with 32 sides. So just tab into edit mode and select the lower half of it. Actually, you could leave a couple more of loops in there, because it will help, since the texture has a part which is the ground, but I'll use just this half sphere now. Now open an UV image editor and select all the faces and unwrap them. and open the sky texture that we just made. Now, as you can already see, our unwrapped, it's the same shape that the texture, so we won't have much more adjustments. With the sky as it was, like when we downloaded it, it would have been a bit of a nightmare to map. So go into the edit buttons and set smooth, and now if you go to texture view mode, you'll see that we can see the texture yet. We need to add a material and map the image in there. So as we did in the previous part of the series, go to the texture buttons and activate a texture channel and select the sky texture to it. And now back into the material buttons, select UV for the map input, and in the map 2 panel select color and specularity color. And there we have our skydome. We're not done yet, but almost there. You just see that the sky is visible from the outside but not in the inside. That's because we need to make the mesh, the faces of the mesh, to be two-sided. And to do so, tap again into the edit mode and go to the editing buttons. And now that the mesh is unwrapped, there's a new panel called texture face, where we can set different options for our faces. Let's first deselect collision, since we won't have the need for it in the game engine for this object, and select two side. Now this only applies to the active face, which is the one with that dotted pattern, and to apply it to all the faces, we need to hit that copy button that is in there. Make sure to do so, because if you don't, the change will only apply to one face and you will be left wondering what's happening. And there we have our skydome with our two-sided faces. Another thing that we should do now is, as I said before, the distortion in the image is not the same. It gets worse when you get to the edge. So I just activated proportional edit, went into the image editor and selected the center vertex and scaled everything to fit better the distortion of the image. And there we can now start testing this skydome in our main scene. But first, since we're going to link the object into our scene, we need to make it a group. So just add our skydome object to a group and save, and we're going to go into our main scene and link to it. And here's the scene as we left it in the previous part. We're going to link the skydome. To do so, just hit Shift F1 and go to the file. In this case it's skydome.blend. Select group, and in there you will have all the groups that you have in that file. In this case we only have the skydome group. Make sure you select relative paths and link and load the library. And right now you can't see it, because when you link it, it's it gets added to the group menu in the add menu. So just go there and click to add it. Another thing about linked objects is that they can be modified in this file. If you link something, you won't be able to edit it. You can now go there and see that it has no material. If you were to edit it in here, if you wanted to, you will have to append it. But this is a pretty neat way to work, because we can edit the object in its own file and it will get updated here later. So let's try and see how it looks in real time. And you can see there's a pretty bad bending in the sky. Also, it's really dark. So let's fix it. Let's go back to our skydome blend and go to the material buttons, and we're going to activate sea transparency and change its alpha value to half of it, 0.5. This will make our object a bit transparent, so it will fade into the sky and it will prevent the bending, that ugly bending, from appearing. There's a bit of bending in there while the high dynamic range filter does its work, but it's also because of the recording of the video. And now one final thing is that the object is transparent in the game engine but not in the viewport, and we need to change that. Go to the texture face panel again, select alpha from the alpha active face mode, copy it to all the faces, and there we have it. Our object is transparent in the viewport too. Let's change the camera a bit, move it around with Shift F for fly mode. Now select the camera and grab it. And let's see how it looks. Much better now. So we're done with our skydome. Now let's start with filters. Now I open the file, a different file. I change the position of the sky, also the lights that are just the sun and an enemy lamp. And let's see which filters we have already in the scene. Look, that I have the camera selected, and these are the logic buttons of the camera. We have few properties on the left and some logic bricks. Mainly they're all 2D filters. First one is called bleach, next one gamma, HDR, and screen space ambient occlusion. Let's see all of them one at a time, adding them. Also, I had all the files, all the filters set to be activated with the keyboard, but we can use an always sensor. And this is bleach. Bleach actually makes all the scene to have a lot more of contrast. And the next one is the gamma correction filter. We corrected all the textures, so this filter will make them look like they should. And the next one is the HDR one. So we activate high dynamic range for the colors in the game. And the last one is the screen space ambient occlusion. And you can see there's a little bit of occlusion, but it's based on the actual geometry of the mesh. Now we're done with all the 2D filters we have added, so let's talk about these other scripts that are linked to an always sensor with pulse mode set to true. Are these Python controllers which constantly read information from the real-time scene. First we have the read luminance one, which as its name says, gets the luminance in the scene and feeds it to the HDR 2D filter. Then we have the get stuff script and also the glue project. I'm not really sure what these two do, but they're needed for the HDR and the SSAO to work. The get stuff, I think, gets the width and height of the screen, but I won't talk too much about it because I'm not really sure. So let's focus on the properties. We can see in the HDR filter that it has two properties named AVGL, that means average luminance, and HDR amount. Since they don't have a value in the script, we need to add them to the filter's object properties. Now you can see I've been changing the HDR amount. If you go higher with the value, the image will get darker or have more contrast. And the average luminance is left to 0 because the value comes from the Python controller. Now I'm showing you the screen space ambient occlusion, which needs the width and height properties. Again, since the get stuff script is getting it, we leave the values to 0. And that's basically it for these scripts. You just need to make sure that all of the ones that have any property declared at the beginning of the script that has no values in there, you will probably need to add a property to your object. And speaking of which, I said I have all these logic bricks and properties in the camera, but I feel it would be a bit more tidier if we have an object just for it, and that means we will have to replicate the settings we have for the camera. So just add an empty and move it somewhere you can see it. I'm gonna name it effects, and instead of applying all of these properties and logic bricks to the empty, we're gonna copy it. So select first our empty and then the camera, which has all the things we want, and it's now the active object, and hit Ctrl C and select logic bricks. You can now select the empty and you can see it has the camera's logic bricks, and do the same for the properties. And there, our FX empty has all the things we need. Now you could go to the camera and start deleting all the logic bricks and the properties, but it will be faster if we just select another object that has none of them and do the same, copy the attributes. And there we have our camera without logic bricks and without properties. And all the ones we had are now in our empty effects. And that's it for our base 2D filters that we already have in our previous tutorial. So let's just add a couple of 2D filters more. There. You can, as we did with the skydome, you could append the filters or save them from the file you downloaded into a text file and open in your text editor, which is what I'm going to do now. I'm going to open the read depth filter, a script actually, this is not the filter, and open the depth of field depth blur, which is the filter we're going to add now. And this is an example of what I've already been telling you before. This is a filter which needs a Python controller to work. So we have our 2D filters linked to an always sensor without the pulse mode set to true, and then the other always sensor hooked to the 3 Python controllers. Also remember, you have to set the pulse mode to true. And to this sensor is where we're going to add our read depth script. So to do so, just select the read depth from the drop down in the text editor. And now with the script in there, we just need to add a new controller and set its type to Python. Then copy the name from the script name and paste it in the controller. And go to actuators, select 2D filter, and again copy the name of the DOF depth blur, set the filter to custom, and in the script slot paste the name of the script you want. Now one thing you have to take care of now is of the pass number. This is by default set to 0, but if you have 2 filters in the same pass number, you will get bad results. They probably won't work. So just set each filter on its own pass number. In this case, this is going to be 4. And now, if we go to the game engine and try it, you can see everything is blurred, which is not what we want, because there's no focus in the image. And the reason for this is because there's a property called focus in the DOF depth blur script, which has no value set in there. And as the comment says, the focus property gets its value from the read depth script that we put in the controllers. And to make it work, we just need to add a property to our object and call it focus. Now if we try it in the game engine, you can see the cave area is in focus, whereas the sides of the image are blurred. And that's the result we want. Adding filters is basically this easy. You just need to make sure all the properties and all the needed scripts are in there. So let's just add another one, and this will be an easy one which doesn't need any properties or extra controllers. It's just the 2D filter. But this time, instead of opening the the file from our hard drive, we're going to append it from our effects file. There I have a list of all the filters that the file I've downloaded has, and I selected edge blur. So as we did before, add a new 2D filter, set it to custom, and put the name in the script slot. Add a pass number for it, and what this filter does is blur the edges of the objects. But since we only have one object in the scene, the result is not easily to spot. So let's add a cube to the scene so we can watch it better. You probably may want to see this in full screen because it's not that strong, and you may miss the effect. So now we hook the filter again, and you can see the edges of the cube are a bit blurred, so there's some sort of anti-aliasing in the game engine. And now we're done with adding filters. You can add more if you want. I'm showing you now my final scene. I've added a light scattering filter. Also, I had a bloom filter in there, but we're not going to use it. And this is how it looks now. See how the blue of the sky bleeds into the terrain, especially in the sides of the cave. And we're done with the filters. So let's talk about a few things we can change in the world buttons. First, we're going to add the mist, and this is an option that is quite useful to bring together the whole scene. Doesn't have much of an effect in this scene particularly because there's only an object and in the foreground and a background, but with more objects it's a really good option. You can change the distance where the fog begins and also the intensity, and the color of the mist is controlled by the background color. There I'm just changing the color to bright yellow so you can see the difference. See that with this kind of color the sky gets completely white because of the light scattering filter. And there I'm just changing the color so you can see different results. Also there's the exposure and range sliders down in the world buttons. This will help us to adjust the brightness in our scene, so we have a little bit more of control on the lighting. See, you can go really high and everything is overexposed, so just play with them and find the right values. And finally, there's a new option in Blender 249, which is this frames per second option, which lets you limit the frames per second on the simulation. Now I've changed it to 60, which is the default when you open Blender, and you can see even with the filters the game engine runs quite smoothly, but I like to keep it at 30 of 25. And that's it. Hope you learned something from this series of tutorials. and see you next time.